Hello, and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Liz Plumpton. Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves, and the times when they've died on stage. This month's episode focuses on the governance and history of amateur theatre. I've been talking to Kevin Middleton, the current chairman of the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham, about the rewards and challenges of being on the board, as well as his theatrical life and theatrical loves. A few months ago, I also sat down with Phil Parsons, one of the Crescent Theatre Birmingham's longest-serving members, to talk about his memories and experiences of the theatre in over 50 years of membership. And now I'm delighted to be joined by sound designer, director and current chairman of the Crescent Theatre, Kevin Middleton. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Thanks very much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thank you. My
more
arm's
often
now made its way down from my back.
You're more often to be found editing the podcast. You have featured once, I think, as a guest on the Backstage Pass, but you finally succumbed, as indeed I did earlier this year, to being the other side of the microphone, whatever that means. So thank you very much. So in today's episode, we're going to take a bit of a look back at the history of the Crescent Theatre, think a little bit about the governance of this and other amateur theatres, and a little bit about what the future might hold.
Cool.
But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you and theatre or amateur theatre. Tell us about your first love.
So, I was thinking about this, and I think the first memory I have of theatre is the Edinburgh Playhouse, and it was the touring production of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats, and I had my grandma one side of me, my brother the other side of me, and my mother the other side of him, and we went because it was my mother wanted to go and see it. But I was always very interested in dance, and I liked singing, and so from that perspective I was like, oh, this is quite cool. And they came out and they interacted in the audience and that kind of thing. So I think that's the first memory I have of theatre, no pun intended. On the song.
So we're about the same age, aren't we? And that was massive. That show was massive when I was a kid.
And I remember my mum talking about, because they'd stripped seats out of the auditorium to build the set properly and all this kind of stuff. So it was a big thing, you know, to be going. So yeah, that's the first thing I remember. And then the first thing I remember seeing in the West End, because we then moved down to London. I remember then seeing Starlight Express, another Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. And I think as a young kid, having the skaters kind of whiz right past you, it was really immersive and engaging. And I think the energy of it and the spectacle of it kind of drew me in and got me excited. And again, it was singing and dancing, and that got me into roller skating as a kid. But I guess it was that kind of really got me excited about what was possible in theatre. We used to go to the local theatre and things quite a lot, and it was all very, you know, traditional theatre, proscenium arch type theatre. So to see two kind of big productions that broke those rules and brought it out into the audience, I think that engaged
That's what
me.
grabbed you.
And I think it made me think then theatre could be more than just this passive experience. You know, I could be almost part of it, and I think that's when I started to think, could I be part of it? So, you know, from that,
you when I introduced you, I said sound designer and director, but I think we should also say, Kevin, that you do sing and dance.
I do sing and dance.
When did that start?
So I've always sung and danced. My mother used to play tapes of various musicals in the car. So whenever we were driving places, I would be singing. She wouldn't sing, but I would be singing. And I was that sad child who used to re-choreograph everything in my bedroom. I'd have the tape on or the CD, and I'd do my own one-man production of an entire musical. So and then
Did you go to classes?
I did. So from the age of about 7, I think I was going to the local drama club, and I remember doing a piece. I got picked to do a solo poem in the first year that I was a member of the first year review, And that was the first solo I did. And I remember kind of standing on the stage on my own, looking out into the unlit auditorium, and thinking, this is quite cool. And then I continued stuff through school, and then got involved in some bigger scale things, and it all kind of happened from there.
And what's been the love of your theatrical life to date?
The love of my theatrical life. So I think it's difficult to pick one, but I will say being part of Mittwoch aus Licht, which was a massive opera by Birmingham Opera Company. It's a Stockhausen opera, and it had never been fully staged before. It was described as the opera that could never be staged. And it was done as part of the London 2012 festival. And it involves 4 helicopters and a string quartet, and each member of the string quartet goes into a different helicopter. And the helicopters take off and fly away. This is just one of the many scenes. The helicopters take off and fly away. There's a video feed beamed back to the auditorium from each helicopter. And so you're hearing the sound. The string quartet can't hear one another, but they hear a click track. And they're playing
over the sound of the helicopter.
They're playing to the click track. They have a half-written piece of music, but they also improvise based on the movement of the helicopter. There's then a DJ who happened to be a DJ from Radio 1 who takes these 4 feeds and mixes it live in front of the audience. And that's just one of the many scenes that happens in this opera. And this is partly why it was called the opera that could never be staged. And I was involved in a scene called the World Parliament, which is all done in octaphonic sound, so most people at home have got stereo sound, a left and a right speaker. If you come to a theatre like ours, that we have more speakers, and you quite often had quadraphonic sound, which is kind of left and right at the front and the back. This was octaphonic, so it's 8 speakers, 8 sources of sound, kind of front, back, top and bottom. So you're surrounded by the sound.
Outside?
This was inside. So apart from the helicopters, which obviously were outside, all of this took place in 2 massive warehouses. And the audience were kind of shuffled from warehouse to warehouse as it got reset. And the sound is octaphonic, and it's really difficult to mix live. And if you listen to a CD of this piece, it sounds awful. It sounds absolutely terrible because you're getting it in stereo. But in the space, when it's octaphonic, it's the most serene sound I've ever heard. And we did a lot of work with the director to not get carried away by the beauty of the sound and stick to the message that we were delivering as part of the World Parliament, the scene that I was in. But the whole scale of it and the majesty of it was, I think that was pretty special, a pretty special thing to be a part of. And it was working with the late Sir Graham Vick, who was a world-renowned opera director. And it was always great working with Graham. He had such vision. And every piece I worked on with him, I used to love it when he would come in and he'd explain the piece to us, and it's like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And then he'd explain his treatment of it, and it's like, oh my God, this is going to be brilliant. And it was always so inspiring to work with him, and it was always on such a grand scale, shoestring budget, but it was always on a grand scale. And it was just really exciting to be part of it. It was grueling and it was horrible. We always found ourselves rehearsing in freezing cold kind of warehouses in the depths of winter, and at one stage we got issued with Birmingham Opera Company thermals to wear under our clothes because it was so cold. But he'd have us doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I remember having to lie on a cold concrete floor in a body bag, and then get up and do a dance in the body bag still. And it sounded like it would be great, except the body bags were proper body bags. Well, they couldn't be proper body bags because we could breathe, but we couldn't see. So we didn't know, once we stood up, we didn't know where we were pointing.
Oh my God. Sounds so stressful.
The great thing is, it was, but it was what it was. Once we recognised there was no way we were all going to be facing the same way and in time and all the rest of it, it just became what it was, and I just enjoyed it for that. But it was always great fun Birmingham Opera Company projects are always great fun to work on. Stressful, always, but great fun because you're doing something so different to what you would normally be doing. And for me, then working as a director, it kind of unlocks something to think, well, you don't have to be constrained by the conventions of theatre. You can do something different. But it's normally performed in a factory or a disused cinema or something random. And the audience is normally on their feet, wandering with the action in a kind of promenade style.
Fantastic. Tell us about the one that got away.
Probably the most recent one would be My Night with Reg, which is one of my favourite plays, and I'd been asking for it to go into the season, suggesting for it to go into the season for years and years, and then it finally went into the season and I didn't get to direct it, so I would say that's the one that got away. And I guess it goes to show that even as chairman I don't get what I want all the time.
Rarely
rarely
in fact, listeners.
Yes.
Contrary to popular belief.
I think that's true. I think people think I get the first pick of everything, and I genuinely don't. I try to make sure that I go through the same process as everybody else. So maybe next time.
Yeah. Tell us about a time when you died on stage.
Okay. So, the first time I did anything on a London stage, it was a piece called "That's What I Want," and it was directed by a guy called John Abulafia, who had just directed at English National Opera. And it was being staged at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, which is right next to the National Theatre in London. And I'd been selected from the child ensemble with 2 other children to be the Greek chorus narrators of the whole piece, because apparently I had a decent voice that could be heard from the back of a big hall. So
was that singing or speaking?
Both. But the narration bit was spoken, but I sung in it as well.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was a great experience because we did a whole load of voice work. We went away and did all sorts of, everyone else would be doing the ensemble stuff and we'd be off doing our own special training and all the rest of it. But on the opening night, it started, I was sitting in a massive throne upstage centre, and the lights would come up on me. I would say my opening line, then the music would start. I would lead a dance routine down the stage. Then at the end of the routine, final position, I pivot and walk up stage. Every time we'd rehearse this, the cyc, which is a massive great sheet behind us, was lit blue. And we did this big number. I turned and it was red. And I was like, have I just performed on the wrong stage? And I hadn't, but inside I just had this crippling, oh my God, it's all wrong, it's all wrong, it's all wrong.
How old were you?
I was 15.
Right.
Okay. 15, and my very irresponsible parents merrily dispatched me off into London to rehearsal studios in Holborn, and it's before the days of Google Maps. So, we'd kind of looked up the A to Z, and it's like, oh, you come out Holborn station and you go there and it's there. All right, fine. And I was just left to find it on my own. I don't know whether that's trust or neglect, but either way, I found it a hugely, exhilarating experience. But that I died a little bit inside the minute I turned around and I thought everything was wrong. So that's probably, I don't think I've died as an actor on stage. Just trying to think if I've been killed.
Any technical malfunctions?
Oh, plenty of technical malfunctions. Plenty of technical malfunctions. And technical malfunctions come in 2 flavours. The ones the audiences notice and the ones they don't. And they're almost every production, certainly in the opening few shows, there's something that goes wrong for various reasons. And sometimes I think, we probably got away with that. Other times, oh God, that's really obvious. There's been a fair few of those. I can't remember any specific ones recently, but that have happened in front of an audience anyway. I guess maybe I've got better at my craft. But certainly in the early days.
Let's talk a little bit now about the board and the role of a board of directors or trustees, which is a sort of governance function that exists in all charities and therefore most amateur theatres, as most of them are charities, not-for-profit organisations. A lot of the visible work of an amateur theatre like the Crescent can only exist because of a group of volunteer directors on the theatre's board. What is the board's role and why is it important?
Okay, that's a big question. So I guess first and foremost, the board exists to make sure that we as a charity are playing by the rules, making sure that we abide by the law. There's a whole load of charity law that applies to us, but fundamentally, we as trustees have to make sure that everything the Crescent is doing conforms to our charitable purpose. So in our constitution, our charitable purpose is defined, and we have to make sure that we're not off doing all sorts of other things that aren't part of what we're doing. So that's the principal reason we exist. I think in most amateur theatres, the main function of the board, aside from that, is to design the season, pick the plays that are going to be performed. And they may be involved in casting and things like that, but ultimately that's what a lot of the boards do. We're one of the biggest amateur theatres in the UK. I think there's only one that's slightly bigger than us, certainly in the Little Theatre Guild, which is a collection of amateur theatres across the UK. So we're unusual in as much as we employ a lot of staff. So we're not just an amateur theatre company, we're also an employer, so we as a board have to make sure that we are abiding by all the relevant legislation in that respect, making sure we're treating all of our employees fairly. So there's all of that, but we have to get involved as a board in all sorts of decision making about what we're going to do. So yes, we pick the season, and that's a major part of what the board does here, but we're also debating what do we expect of our membership in terms of their behaviour and conduct. What do we, front of house duties, that's a perennial conversation that we have at the board. What do we expect of people from front of house? How often do they need to do things? What do they need to do? Who's exempt? All these kinds of debates, but it can be as interesting as debating the price of Kit Kats is the one that people often cite. And it's basically anything that's going on in the theatre that needs some kind of leadership input. That's the function of the board. And obviously there are multiple people on the board, some of whom have defined functions where decisions naturally sit. Some of it is more nebulous or wide-ranging, and that's why we have multiple people on the board, so that we get a range of views, because we're representing 200-ish people in the theatre. So we want to make decisions that represent those people as well.
And I'll say at this point that I am also a member of the board and have also been in the past a general member, but for the purposes of our conversation, let's assume that I don't know as much as I do, because our listeners won't necessarily have been in that position. So tell us a bit about the constitutional makeup of the Crescent Theatre's board and what everyone's role on it is.
Okay, so there's 12 roles on the board. I'll start with me, chairman. My role is to chair the board meetings, set leadership, direction, that kind of thing. The company secretary is the next role on the board. So the chairman and the company secretary are the two legally mandated roles that we have to have. But then constitutionally we have a whole load of others. So the secretary is there not to act as a PA to the chairman. It's a legal function to make sure that the minutes are correctly recorded and that we're complying with all the necessary legislation in terms of reporting, financial reporting, all that kind of stuff, making sure we supply all the information that the Charities Commission needs and that the Companies House need. So then we have a treasurer who looks after all the money.
Although we do employ I don't know what the right word would be, a bookkeeper.
We do. So we have a finance officer who we pay. We also retain accountants. So we have an accountant who comes in periodically and works with our finance officer to make sure that we're doing everything properly in the accounting systems. We also have auditors that come in. We're required to have our accounts audited every year for the Charity Commission. So they go through and make sure there's nothing dodgy happening, that everything's above board. We have a number of paid staff that support a number of board functions. So the treasurer looks after the money, sets the budget, tries to make sure that we end the year not in a loss. But that's not always possible. So then we have functions such as, well, we've got you, Liz, as arts manager.
Yep.
So arts manager is there to basically put in place the season of plays that we do each year. And have you spoken about that process on a previous podcast? I feel like you might have.
A little bit, yes. I did when I was interviewed. I suppose it's output, and the quality of that output is what I think my role is.
Yeah.
At a strategic level. I don't mean personally doing everything.
But I think the choice of plays is an interesting one, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how that works, and people think we can just pick whatever we want and do whatever we want, and there's whole layers of complexity. And I know you put a lot of thought into which plays make up a balanced season and when they fit throughout the year. You know, do they work as a school's text, or do we need to put them at a point where teachers would be able to bring people, making sure that we as a theatre have got the support that we need to put them on. So whether that's people to costume it or light it or build a set for it, making sure that
even populate the cast as well.
Well, exactly. You know. The balance between male-female roles, age of roles, to make sure that it's something that we can put on. There's all these factors that we have to consider, and then we think long and hard about that, and take that out to a wider group to agree a season. And then we have to apply for the rights, and that's the next level of complication, because we don't always get what we want to perform. And I
don't think we've ever got all the licenses for the first choice plays in any season I've ever had any input into, either as a general board member or as the arts manager. So.
And I don't think people necessarily appreciate that piece of complexity, that we can't just do what we want, we have to get the rights. And then those rights come with stipulations about how we have to do the play, certain things that we must or must not do, and that often surprises people. So we've got you, and then we've got members manager, which is a bit like the HR director for members. You know, so the members manager is there to represent the members on the board, but they have various functions, including making sure that people are doing their front of house duties, and various other things, but all focused around the membership.
Inducting new members,
dealing with new member applications, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of admin involved in that role. We then have a marketing officer, whose role is to produce posters and make sure that our plays are publicised, whether that's through social media or other means. We have a diversity officer. That's a role that I added to the board to focus on equality and diversity. When I took over, well, even before I took over, I was on the board as treasurer for a number of years before I became chairman. And I'd repeatedly said at board meetings, it saddens me that if you step outside the doors of this building, the population that you see walking past isn't the population that you see on our stage. And we shied away from doing certain plays because we didn't think we would be able to cast them. And I wanted to challenge some of that. So I created the role of diversity officer to look at some of that stuff. And there's some good work going on there, understanding the challenges that some of our existing membership have, as well as looking at how we can engage with other communities to try and broaden or not necessarily broaden our membership, but to make our membership more reflective of the community in which we exist. So we've also got an education and communities officer, and the role there is to engage with schools principally, but with a whole range of other communities, to make them aware of what we are, find out what we can do that would be of interest to them, so that we're better engaging with those communities.
Head of production. I
forget that one because I'm covering that role at the moment.
Yes.
So head of production is basically the person whose job it is to get every play from the rehearsal room to the stage. So to make sure that all the different departments are coordinated, that we're going to have a set if we need one, that it's going to get built, that all the necessary costumes are happening. So head of production notionally chairs all the production meetings, but we have various production managers that can also take on that function for an individual play. Head of production also balances the production budget, so making sure that we can afford to put all of our plays on the stage. I'm trying to think if I've done all the named roles. I think I've done all the named roles, and then we have 3 general members. And the function of general members is to get out there into the membership and canvass the views and opinions of the membership and reflect those back to the board. Or if people have got particular issues, they can talk to the general members and get an idea from a general member as to why we might be doing something a particular way. They'll be able to explain to them why the board made certain decisions, or to come and bring something to the board if it's something that they think the board should be aware of and isn't. So yeah, it's quite a broad range of subjects that we cover.
Thank you. So board meetings are sometimes perceived as being shrouded in mystery. For anyone listening who hasn't ever attended one before, how would you sum up what happens in a typical Crescent board meeting?
Okay, so we start by sacrificing a goat. They're really not that mysterious. It's a pretty mundane experience lasting anywhere between an hour and 4 hours, depending on how controversial the topics are that we're discussing. But each of the people who has a job title other than general member submits a report, and I encourage those to come in writing so that people can have read that in advance, and then if there's anything that we need to discuss as a board, we can discuss it having thought about it principally. But also to save time, because if it's something that's just for noting, then we can save time in the meeting by having that in advance and just noting it. So we go round each of the different people in turn. They present whatever it is they need to present to us. We will then discuss it, and as a collective we will form our opinions. Sometimes we might have to have a vote on something to make sure that we've got support. We make policy and that kind of things from that point forward, or discuss the price of Kit Kats. But it's basically a place where whatever the issues of the day are, the group of elected people will discuss them, thrash out the various options, and come to a decision about what the theatre's policy will be on that. And it's always one of those things you have to accept, that with 200 people in a group, we're never going to keep everybody happy. There's going to be someone who doesn't agree with whatever the decision is we make. We sometimes have to make unpopular decisions, and that's just part of being in a leadership role. But I think we always make them with the best of intentions, and bearing in mind our legal obligation to do the best for the longevity of the theatre as a charity. We're legally bound to do that, and so sometimes we make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily choose to make if we didn't have to, but we are bound to make those decisions. And sometimes we make decisions in light of things that are going on either in the theatre or in the wider world, and we think we should maybe do something about that for us. So there's a whole range of reasons that we discuss things, but basically in a board meeting we sit around, we chat about the topics of the day, and we make popular or unpopular decisions.
And then people get action points,
and people get
carry out various things.
Everyone always comes to the meeting having completed all of their actions.
Absolutely. So being the chairman, or indeed any role on the board of an amateur theatre, can sound like quite a demanding, maybe even thankless task at times. What do you find rewarding about the role, and how would you sell being on the board of their amateur theatre to anyone thinking about getting involved?
So it can be thankless. Sometimes it can feel thankless, and sometimes it can feel lonely. But also sometimes, I guess the rewarding side is when I look back and I look at the productions that we've put on in a year, and I think how fantastic they've been and how well received they've been. And that gives me a great sense of satisfaction. So we had a members' party in the summer, I think it was August, and as part of that, a member, Tom Loud, made a compilation video of the season. And I was so proud looking at that video and seeing all the productions that we'd put on and how great they looked, and remembering the fantastic quality of what we put on the stage. So that's rewarding.
Yeah. And how would you sell being on the board to anyone thinking about getting involved? Because we do sometimes struggle to fill board positions, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, we've got a few vacancies at the moment. I think it's... Being on the board is always difficult because it's really easy for everyone to just blame the board, and so you can feel like it's our fault that things aren't as good as they could be. But actually, if you want to change things, if you want to make things better, one of the best ways of doing that is by being on the board and having a voice, representing the views of the people that feel the same way you do, and convincing those people that make the decisions that there are different decisions that could be made. So I would say to anybody who feels strongly, firstly, you can speak to your general member about things, but consider being on the board. And if you've got skills and experience that would help us move forward in a new direction, or in a stronger, better way, then consider giving some time up, being on the board.
Great. So you are the 6th chairman of the Crescent Theatre, formerly the Municipal Players, and you find yourself in post during the 100th year of the company's existence. How do you feel about the history of the theatre, and what do you hope that the next century will bring for the Crescent?
The Crescent has a fantastic history. We've just done a project where we've kind of digitised a lot of our archive, and when you look back through that and through some of the production shots, it's really amazing to think all this has been happening over the last 100 years. I mean, we're sitting in the wardrobe at the moment, surrounded by decades, if not most of a century of history in costume form. When you think that it was some people at Birmingham City Council that just wanted to entertain their colleagues, and they put a show on in Christmas in 1923, and they had such a good time, and the people had such a good time watching, that they said, oh, let's do this again. And then they formed a little group amongst themselves to put on plays, and then they took it even further and got a building together, and those initial people that were part of the Municipal Players that really got their hands dirty, literally building a theatre. The dedication that they've put in is kind of a different level to what I put in, I think. I'm certainly not building a theatre.
No, I think the current members of the board building a theatre would not be a building anyone would want to inhabit safely, let's be honest.
It would be taped together. But the dedication from back then, and then I think that probably, when you've gone to all that effort to create a place, to create theatre, I think that must have spurred the people on to make sure that everything they put on was great, in terms of the best possible quality that they could manage. And you look at some of the stuff we've done in the past, and we've always seemed to be not at the cutting edge of stuff. We've always tended to do bits of new writing each season, and we don't just do the same old kind of few plays that we trot out season after season. We've always done new and exciting stuff, and I think that's fantastic. We've gone through, this is our 3rd building, so we've gone through 3 successive buildings, each more professional, I want to say, than the last in terms of its facilities. I think the quality of play that we put on today is certainly as good as many professional things that I see, and I think that's a fantastic testament to the dedication of the current membership. But we build upon the shoulders of those that went before us, and the fantastic foundations they laid for us. Into the future, well, we'll need 3 more buildings, because we seem to move every 30 years. We're about due for this one. We've been here 25, so who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. But I think I really hope that my stewardship of the theatre will leave it positioned to go on producing fantastic quality work. I would like to think that we will move forward with some of the newer technology that's coming into theatre today, so that we can stay on par with some of the professional stuff that you see, because a lot of people are really... I think there was a discussion today in the bar after a performance where some of the young people that saw the performance were absolutely astounded that the people on stage weren't, well, no one involved was being paid, and they were interrogating some of the staff saying, do you get paid? Do you get paid? Do you get paid? And I think a lot of people are really surprised at the fantastic quality of stuff we put on, with none of the people involved being paid for it. And we do it, we're amateurs, it means to love something, and we do it because we love it, and I think that comes through. I think sometimes if you're doing something just to get a paycheck, you're not necessarily invested in it in the same way.
There's some terrible TIE tours. Sorry if you do TIE tours, but you know, I've got friends who are actors, and really that's not for love, that's just for the paycheck.
And I think here everyone who's doing it is doing it because they want to be doing it, and so I think that shows. I think that comes across to an audience that you know, people love what they're doing. I think that shows, and that probably lifts things.
Fantastic. And finally, Kevin, previous chairs of the theatre have had parts of the current building named after them. So we have the Ron Barber Studio and the Lowry Bar. If you could have a room or piece of equipment at the theatre named after you in the future, what would it be and why?
Do you know, I don't know that I would want anything named after me. I'm not really a fan of. I really don't know what I would choose to have named after me. We're running out of places to name things after. I don't know. Maybe if we buy a new sound desk, it could be. But I don't know. It's not my style to have something named after me. I prefer to kind of stay a little bit below the radar in that respect. Certainly, if I was still alive, it would feel a bit jarring for me. When I'm dead, you can do what you want.
Okay, noted. Well, we've got that recorded now, unless you edit it out yourself later. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Is there anything else I'd like to mention? We have some vacancies on the board if anybody's interested. We currently have vacancies for head of production. We have a vacancy for a marketing manager, and we have a vacancy for a education and communities officer. So if anybody feels like they've got a contribution they would like to make, please get in touch with Jan Cunningham, secretary at crescent-theatre.co.uk.
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Cheers, Liz.
Great to talk to you. Thanks.
Cheers.
The word stalwart is often bandied about when talking about long-standing members of organisations such as amateur theatres. Looking it up in the dictionary, a stalwart is a loyal, reliable and hard-working supporter or participant in an organisation or team. Back in September of this year, I was lucky enough to sit down with Phil Parsons, who really is a stalwart of the Crescent Theatre, to find out a little bit more about how he first got involved many years ago and about his memories and experiences since then. I'm delighted to be joined now by Phil Parsons. Phil is a long-standing Crescent Theatre Company member with a wealth of experience in the different buildings that the theatre's had and a number of different roles. So Phil, thanks very much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thank you.
Could you start maybe by just telling me a little bit about how and when you joined the Crescent?
Back in 1966, my sister was in a local operatic society, came to me and says, would I spend a few nights, or at least one night a week, helping their society to make scenery? And I thought, oh, can I be bothered? But I did. We used to go every Monday night to 2 or 3 hours and go over to the pub. So it was a social evening out.
Yeah.
And we did these musical shows on at Turves Green's boys' school on a very basic stage, no real equipment, but that's how I learned the job. And I started in 66. 1969 we came to the Crescent with Die Fledermaus.
And that would have been in Cumberland
Street,
building.
yes.
Yeah.
And I was in charge of building the set, and I also assembled that show for the first time ever in this theatre I'd never seen, never heard of.
And that's an opera, is it?
Die Fledermaus is an opera, So it's a big 3-set show, and you know, you have to have 3 box sets during the evening, 2 intervals. You had 15 minutes to take 1 box set down and put up another. And that was 69. 70 we did Vagabond King. 71 Orpheus in the Underworld.
As an external company that was hiring.
As an outside company.
Yeah.
And the outside manager during Orpheus in the Underworld was somebody who used to teach me at school.
Oh, right.
So I knew him,
Yeah.
and he remembered me. And I was SMing the show, and he comes backstage and puts a form on the desk and says, "Here, sign this." I said, "What is it?" He said, "It doesn't matter what it is, just sign it." I said, "No." I tell you what it is. He says, "It's a membership form for the Crescent. Go on, sign it." So I signed it, and that was 1971 when I first joined.
So you were sort of coerced into it. They obviously saw your skill set and thought, let's get him in.
I mean, in those days, to become a member, everybody had to have an interview with the chairman. And the chairman in those days was Austin Burnett, which you won't remember.
I don't remember, no.
No. He was followed by Ron Barber, then Ian Thompson, then Andrew Lowry, now Kevin. So I've had about 5
what was
chairmen.
that interview like then, Phil? Can you remember it?
I walked into the office and Austin was just on his own. I said, "Oh, hello." He says, "You've come as an actor." I said, "No, I don't want to act." I said, "I want to do backstage SMing." And I told him I'd SM'd all these musicals. "Oh, in that case," he says, you're a member," he says. He said, "If you go down on stage, someone will be along to start building the set."
Yeah.
And the first play was The Ruling Class. And the first thing I ever had to build was a 4-poster bed.
Oh, really?
And I stood and looked at it and thought, how the heck can I build a 4-poster bed on casters?
Yep.
And somebody had to hang themselves off the end.
Oh, wow.
So it was a lovely play.
Yeah.
In those days, you had 2 weeks to build a set, 1 week of dress rehearsals and technicals, and then it was a 2-week run. And when that was over, you'd then start on the next one. But they only did 7 plays for a year, so you might get a couple of weeks off or so in between. At the beginning, I was doing the Northfield shows and the Crescent shows.
So you were busy.
So I was every night, worked all day, worked in the theatre all night. The first show I ever SM'd for the Crescent was Separate Tables.
I know it well.
As most people do, good old faithful.
Terence Rattigan,
Yeah, and then they decided, I think it was 1972, they was going to do a musical. They'd never done one before. And what they decided to do was Guys and Dolls. He was a member of the theatre who played the piano, an ad hoc orchestra out of members. Of course, I'd SM'd musicals.
In the Northfield Society,
And that's so I landed up with SMing Guys and Dolls. In 1972, we did Happiest Days of Your Life, which I worked on. And I met my wife. She was PAing that show.
Oh, really?
We got married in 1973, so we've just had our golden wedding. We started a family quite quickly, so it got to a point where she stopped being a member, but I carried on. I was allowed to come in quite a bit. And I was SMing Lion in Winter, and because Jane was expecting, she said, "I don't want you to go out every night." But, I'd be out 2 weeks building a set, and a week tech, and a week or 2 weeks.
2 weeks of the show.
That was 5 weeks in a go.
Yeah.
So I said, OK, I'll stop SMing. And I never SM'd another show after that.
Really?
And that was 1973, I think.
So
I've
did
just
you
been...
ever think about going back to that, or is it something you found you didn't miss?
I did miss it, but it was an SM in those days. You had an SM's desk with cue lights, a red and green, and a telephone for emergencies.
Yeah.
But everything was done on cues.
Yeah.
Red, standby, green, go. And you'd use your phone to contact the house manager, and also quite often the sound people who weren't that busy would be in the bar. And you'd have to phone the bar up and say to the barman, "Can you send the sound man back up?
He's got a cue in a minute."
He's got the cue lights on." And you could see from the stage through a little hole, you could see the cue box
Yeah.
in the auditorium. So you knew he wasn't there. And one time he didn't appear, and I phoned up the electrics, and one of the electrics people went and did the cue.
What, just next door and...
No, it's the same
queue?
one.
It was in the same box?
Same box, different ends.
Yeah.
That was it. And I've just built, I don't know, hundreds of sets ever since.
And so,
But
when your sister first asked you to go and help at Northfield, was that because you had a day job that had those skills? What do you...
nothing. I basically was a carpenter and joiner
Yeah, okay.
and did a lot of building work.
Yeah,
So woodwork and that was in the blood.
yeah,
And they'd just done Oklahoma, and she said, like everywhere else, every other society, nobody will go and build the sets and work backstage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a struggle. It was in those days, it still is today.
Yep.
And I can't see it's ever going to get any better. It's just the same few people over and over again.
So what do you like about building sets? You've built, as you said, probably hundreds, if not maybe over 1,000. I don't know. We
Not
don't
that
do the
many, I
maths,
don't
but
think.
you must have built
Yeah.
hundreds of sets. What do you enjoy about it?
The sense of achievement, when you see it,
Yeah.
all painted, on the stage, lit properly, you know, during a performance, you feel, I've helped towards that,
Yeah.
you know, and I was good at it. I was good at telling people what to do,
Yep.
which I still do. I'm always in charge.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, even now, if people like Keith Harris or Colin design sets and build sets, especially Keith, he'll say, can we do this? Can we do that? And if I say no, he'll change it. But you have to be careful, especially with Colin, because if he knows I'm going to build this set, he makes it bigger, more complicated. I'm sure he does.
Yeah. And have you ever designed yourself?
I've never designed, no. I'm not artistic, but I can build anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoy doing the big musical shows,
Yes.
big sets. Crazy for You,
Yeah, that was a big set.
Spamalot.
Somebody has to turn those designs and those ideas into a reality, and also say what isn't, you know, what isn't possible. Is there a set, you mentioned Crazy for You and Spamalot, is there a set that was a favourite of yours to build, or maybe a set where when you saw the show you particularly loved, you know, that show on that set?
The set that most impressed me that I built was Royal Hunt of the Sun.
Peter Schaefer play.
It
Yes.
was. The whole width of the stage, 20 foot high, had a big circle in the centre,
Yeah.
about 8 foot diameter, and radiating off all the way round were petals.
Right. Yeah.
And these were about 18, 2 foot wide, 8 foot long, slightly different lengths, and all built in. And the one side was all painted black. So when you looked
Yeah.
at it, it was just a black background.
Yeah.
Then when the Spanish invaded the Inca kingdom,
Yeah.
all these blades turned,
Yeah.
and they got gold on the back. So
Yeah.
you got the sun, and it was amazing. You know, people...
How did they turn? Was that manually, or was the whole thing?
Well, manually, there's a cable round a pulley on the bottom of each one, all linked, and it went down to a drum
Yeah.
and with a handle on that they could wind the cable in, and as it pulled the cable through, it turned all the pulleys,
Right.
and they all turned at the same time. But most nights they did.
Was that in this theatre or in the?
No, that was in the
theatre?
old theatre. That was about, I don't know, early 70s,
Yeah.
73, 74. I lose track of time after 50 years.
It's a big cast play, isn't it? I think I studied it for A-level theatre studies.
Oh.
And there's loads
a bit
and
heavy
loads
going.
of people. There's all the
The
Incas.
conquistador.
There's all the conquistador. Yeah.
And the Incas and all the Spanish soldiers.
Yeah.
'Cause I had to make the Spanish helmets.
Oh, really? Yeah. So you
And
made some costumes
they
as well.
got one metal one
Yeah.
in props. And they wanted about, I don't know, 10, 12.
Yeah.
So I used the metal one as a mould.
Yeah.
And I built all these helmets out of fiberglass.
Really?
Yeah, at home in my entry. And a neighbour came round saying, "What's that awful smell?"
Yeah.
With the fiberglass going off.
You are, I hope you don't mind me saying, you are one of our longest standing members. In fact, you are a life member of the
I am now.
theatre, which is a
Yeah.
small select group of people who've been members for more than 50 years or more.
I've been here 71, 52 years.
Yeah. So why do you think, I suppose we're not that different to other amateur theatres. We do have long-standing members, but we also have people who come and go, or sometimes even come and are involved for quite a while, maybe 10, 20 years, and then, their life moves on, or they have a family, or they move away, or whatever. Why do you think you've
Why
stuck
did I
around
stay?
so long? Why have you stayed so long?
My mistake was I didn't move away.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just in your blood.
Yeah.
It's a life. I mean, it's been a lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope to do another few more years.
Yeah. So do we, Phil. So do we. Hope that you will as well.
It's getting harder.
Of course.
I think, 3 more years I'll be 80. And it does get harder. I can't do the lifting I used to.
You need to do more of the bossing people about and telling other people.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Directing it rather than doing it. Yeah. But I mean, it's been, I think, an incredible achievement and in contribution that you've made to the Crescent over all those years. And when we look, as you know, hopefully we're getting a digital archive together. We've got Claire, who's our sort of head of archives, and if you go and look through all the old photographs and so on, there must be so many of those sets that have got the Phil Parsons stamp on them.
I've got to the point I can't remember if I built a set or not. I look at a picture and I just cannot remember. I can't remember doing it. I can't remember anything about the play, but I know I must have at least helped on them.
Yes, yeah. Do you have any favourites? Any shows you've seen here or at the old theatre that you particularly enjoyed? You mentioned Guys and Dolls that you stage managed.
The Caretaker.
Oh really? You're a Pinter fan?
Yeah, I like Pinter. Birthday Party, is it?
Yeah, that's Pinter, yeah.
Pinter?
Yeah. Just finally, Phil, I wonder if we could talk briefly about get-ins and get-outs. So you must have been to a lot of both of those. So the get-in, when we basically, nowadays that tends to be when we put the set in the space, having built it largely in the workshop, and then the get-out after the last night when we strike the set. I'm always kind of interested in, particularly when it's a big show, sometimes the get-in seems to go really smoothly and everyone knows what they're doing, and even if it's quite a complicated show, it's sort of, let's say you've come in at 10 o'clock in the morning, by like mid-afternoon everything's pretty much sorted, and other times it seems to be a bit of a nightmare.
It might seem to have been sorted.
How do you know how the get-in's going to go, whether it's going to be a smooth one or a tricky one?
For some get-ins, you come in on a Sunday, but quite often you come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. A big set. Yeah. You never get it all done in a day. Yeah. Very rarely.
Mm-hmm. And when you're thinking about, the other thing I'm always interested in as a not massively technical person, is the sequence. So how do you know, you've got various elements of a set, maybe some are going to be flown, put on the fly bars, some are going to be fixed on the stage. How do you work out what's the best order to do things in?
The flying stuff has to be done first. Mm-hmm. Once the flying's done, you can then start building stuff up on the stage, rostrums and different levels, put the walls in and the masking in.
So with the flying, would that include anything that lighting want to put on their bars as well?
Some days they'll come in beginning of Sunday, drop all the bars, rig the lights, hoist them out of the way, which I quite often moan about. Because, we come in, we want to start.
Yeah.
In the old theatre, I was quite naughty sometimes. I'd put the walls up before the lighting people got in, so they couldn't get the bars down.
I bet you were popular when you did that.
Oh, I wasn't very popular, no, but sometimes, you have to do these things.
And what about getting out? So getting the set down at the end of the show. I mean, I don't know about in this theatre, but certainly in other theatres, I've experienced get-outs that have gone on till sometimes 3-4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, I've done that.
Because there's just so
Many
much
times.
to do.
Yeah, there is. Some big sets.
Yeah.
A lot of flying stuff has to come down and be taken apart. I mean, here we've got a big workshop.
Yeah.
We can carry big chunks of stuff into the workshop. The old theatre didn't have a workshop as such.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small room where we kept some of the wood and sheets of plywood, hardboard in, and the tools in.
Yeah.
But you couldn't build anything in it. Everything had to be built on the
On the
stage.
stage. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they had a big patio out the back, which we could use. And we'd be building stuff on the patio, then carry it in through the paint shop doors onto the stage.
So I suppose on reverse, when you're getting out, you then had to break things down.
They had to be
small enough
broken down.
pieces to get them out again.
So everything
what
had
do you
to
think
be...
is the latest time you've ever been doing a strike until? Or the earliest time, I suppose?
With the Crescent? Well, usually I go home
Yeah.
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
I've had enough. But I remember a get-in
Yeah.
with Northfield Operatic. We came in on the Sunday morning. I spent all day because they rehearsed in the afternoon. So the set would have to go up in the morning for a 2 o'clock rehearsal.
Oh, really? So you had
Dress
like
rehearsal.
a deadline, yeah.
They started on the Monday.
Yeah.
And more than once, I'd be working, putting the set up, SMing the show, and working overnight to do all the bits that we didn't get done. I tell you, in those days also, the fire brigade did a check. Every show you did, they would walk on stage halfway through a performance,
Yeah.
wanting to go on stage and set fire to stuff.
Yeah, I remember
But
that, yeah.
luckily, they don't do that anymore.
No.
At least I haven't seen.
They don't seem to. It was all, everything had to be fire retarded, didn't it? All
They
your
did.
fabrics and everything.
Soak everything so
Yeah.
far up. But, trying to stop them walking on halfway through a play,
Quite difficult.
it was difficult.
Yeah.
But, some of them got a bit uppity and would stand and wait. Some would just give up and go home. No, there used to be problems.
Oh, well, thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat to us, Phil, about all your memories and experience of the Crescent. Really, really appreciate it.
It's been good because I've had to think.
Good.
I've had to think at home and look up
Yeah.
what I'd done in the early days. I got some old programmes from the first year, but I seem to have lost a big chunk of them. I think my wife's been
Tidying.
downsizing. But no, thanks for asking me anyway, because I don't know how long I can carry on doing it.
Well, obviously,
Well,
selfishly,
another couple of years, I
we
hope.
We
Yeah.
hope for a little bit longer. But certainly your contribution to the theatre over more than 50 years has been, immense, really, and something to be really proud of.
Right, thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode. You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media. Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. This episode was researched and presented by Liz Plumpton. The music is by Brendan Stanley, and the podcast is edited by Kevin Middleton.